Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion, or we want to be contemplative, or simply ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to welcome you to our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that resonate with our fellow friends and seekers here in the desert.
Our hope is that you will find life for your body, soul, and spirit.
And now, here is our show. Before we get started with today's guests, let's check in with Karl and JD.
Welcome back to Joey and Jordan, or whatever we're calling this thing. So
makes me laugh every time.
There's been a lot of fun stuff going on back on your guys' side of the world.
Mm-hmm.
The Party of Freedom and Democracy, the GOP, has been banning a lot of books. I think that's pretty fun.
Yeah,
most of them about civil rights warriors, but pay no mind to that.
Mm-hmm. So one of the guys, of course, is Greg Locke, one of the pastors that does that. He's holding big bonfires, and I heard that at one of them, someone brought some Bibles to burn since they were burning books.
Oh, hell yeah.
The Bible is one of the nastiest books. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what they're worried about, and maybe that people will get equal rights, or will understand the LGBTQ plus movement, or I know I'm saying that wrong, but the Bible's a pretty skanky book in places, right?
It is filled with a lot of you pick your poison. You want talking about like detailed sexual stuff. You got Song of Solomon. If you want to talk about violence, you can go through the whole thing. Right. Communism, or maybe not communism, but anti-capitalism. You can look at Jesus chasing the money changers out of the temple. Abortion, in Numbers, they talk about drinking the bitter water to get rid of an unwanted pregnancy if your wife cheats on you.
Right.
It's all there. So I honestly think I'm waiting for these GOP senators and Congress people to start yelling "Hail Satan!"
Right. Banning.
Let's burn some Bibles, y'all. If you don't like those things, then you better stop supporting that book.
Yeah. It's just I don't understand. When I was in high school, maybe right after high school and college, the big thing for us was like Catcher in the Rye, right? And Catcher in the Rye, Franny and Zooey, those kind of books by J.D. Salinger were banned books. And now I don't know even why. There was a little cussing in them or something.
Catcher in the Rye, probably language, and they talk about like sex work and stuff. But Catcher in the Rye, the only reason I read it was because it was a banned book.
That's exactly my point.
Always so funny to me, because people love to ban these books, and it's like, well, that just makes it so tempting. Every time I hear something's banned, I'm like, okay, let's go find a copy of this online.
Yeah,
like immediately.
See what all the fuss is about.
The other thing is that Catcher in the Rye is such I read it when I was like in university, and I was like, this sounds like it was written by an angsty 16-year-old, because that's the focus of the book. I was like, this is not controversial at all. It just sounds like a kid who's depressed. Yeah. It's not. It's a good book. J.D. Salinger is a good writer, but it's not controversial in the least.
Right. Now, part
of it, I think, was because it was quote unquote responsible for the assassination of John Lennon.
But those same people didn't like John Lennon either, probably, right? He's not a.
Oh no!
He's not a conservative.
Didn't he do like a sex protest? And / he said the Beatles were bigger than Jesus. They hate him too. So it does. Yeah. Right. But expecting any of this to be have a logical through line, I think if you think that that's going to happen, I mean, it's just not.
Yeah. So this is just me, but what you just made me think of was the word in John chapter 1, in the beginning was the word, the logos. That word predated Christianity, and logos, what it means. So the word of God, the word, is like logic and reasoning. That's what it means. Some people even say, the logic of God. So that's very interesting to me, because I want everything to be logical. And politics is not logical at all. And thinking that banning books, I think Amazon produces a book every 5 minutes, something like that. Everybody's writing their own book. The biggest thing you can do online right now is start your own publishing thing and start, it's just a few easy steps. In fact, I'm publishing my own book coming up real soon. So you're not going to win, Greg Locke.
No, and not to mention that you can get these books from anywhere. There's whether it's like peer-to-peer sharing sites or whatever it is, you can try to fight the information, but unless they shut down the internet, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, your children are just taking notes, watching the news. Oh, that would be a good book.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. That's literally what kids, especially teenagers' brains are programmed to do. Is, my dad said this is stupid. Well, I'm gonna come fucking read that.
I better read that.
That's number one on. Yeah, exactly.
What are they trying to keep from me?
On the list.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
And now back to the Desert Sanctuary podcast with Karl and Laura Forehand. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. We're glad that you're here today. I'm Laura Forehand, and I'm in Northwest Missouri, and I'm here with Karl Forehand, and he's in a totally different state, like of the United States, not totally different.
I'm off the grid.
Yeah. So what's going on?
Well, so I've been visiting my mom this weekend, so I have to interact with all of my family. So that would be interesting. But I got to take a little bit of time and see people along the way. Saw our granddaughters a few days ago. Excited about that. But yeah, nothing much. The Diner came out. My second novel came out recently, and so I'm excited about that. It's starting a little slower than most of them start because I published it myself, and I spent a lot of time doing that instead of kind of getting ready for the launch. But it's good. But today we're here to talk to Emily. So why don't you tell us about her?
Yeah. So Emily Elizabeth Anderson is a Christian blogger and trauma recovery advocate. Oh, every single solitary time I read a bio, I have to mess something up. I'm going to start that again. Emily Elizabeth Anderson is a Christian blogger and trauma recovery advocate for people who have experienced abuse within a Christian environment. After growing up in a fundamentalist cult for 23 years and experiencing childhood domestic violence, Emily began her journey to recovery in 2015 and eventually found Jesus to be her ultimate healer. She soon turned her passion for writing into a blog, and her story has since been featured on several media outlets, including NPR and Amazon Prime. Deeply passionate about educating on the realities of trauma survival and recovery, Emily's focus has been to create a space for survivors to experience support wherever they are in their journey, as well as find community with others who have experienced similar trauma. Emily married her best friend Joshua in 2020, and together they are co-owners of an ever-growing furniture refinishing business and co-wranglers of their 2 cats and 1 very large dog. Welcome to the podcast, Emily. We're glad that you're here.
Thanks, Laura and Karl. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to finally get to chat with you guys.
Yes.
Yeah, we're having several challenges with technology here, but we'll be okay eventually, right? Everything's going to settle down, and just be here. Maybe if you could just tell us kind of a brief version of your story of what you've gone through, and moving away from a cult, and all those things, and whatever detail you want. Laura and I are here to listen, to believe your story, and let you tell it. So hopefully we can do that. And usually it goes pretty fast, and the hour goes by before we can even get all our questions in. So tell us your story. Tell us your story, and in as much detail as you want.
Sure. And I apologize ahead of time if my voice is a little hoarse. I currently have bronchitis, so I am still recovering from that. So anyone who's heard me before knows that this is not normally how my voice sounds. So yes, I was raised in a fundamentalist, patriarchal Christian home growing up. We were a part of some pretty strict fundamentalist churches growing up. I actually attended a Christian school that was attached to a fundamentalist church from 1st through 4th grade. And then in 5th grade, my mom pulled me out of that school. We left that church and ended up joining the Institute in Basic Life Principles. It was an organization started by Bill Gothard, and he had a homeschooling movement called ATI, or the Advanced Training Institute. And my mom put me in that, pulled me out of that private Christian school and started homeschooling me at the age of 12. And oddly enough, my mom pulled me out of that Christian school because she did not like the legalism that was present, and thought that by joining ATI, we would be leaving some of that legalism. And I realize now that what we did was just jump straight from the frying pan into the fire. And I mean, the legalism just increased by 100 times. And the way ATI is set up is you would have wisdom booklets, this homeschooling material that you would have to purchase, and you would study every single day. It was kind of like an extended Bible study almost, except it went far-reaching to where scripture was misapplied into history lessons and anatomy lessons and science, and just so much cherry picking and twisting of scripture. It's just mind blowing to me now, looking back at some of that material. I can't believe that we fell hook, line, and sinker for it. But we studied that material, and then once a year we would go to family conferences where everyone from ATI would join together. We would listen to a week of messages from various pastors or Bible teachers, and we would learn a lot of topical messages on parents would listen to messages on rearing children, and students would listen to messages on avoiding the wrong kind of friends, or how to apply the Bible in whatever way to conquer, I don't know, anger or something, just random topics. And when I was 13 at the first conference we went to, I was actually spotted by Bill Gothard, and Gothard was in his 70s at the time. And he spotted me and asked me if I would quit school and come up and work at the IBLP headquarters full-time in Chicago. And thankfully, my mom's radar went up, and she did not like that idea. I didn't think it was wise. For the next 6 years, every year at the conference, Bill would try to convince me to come up to headquarters. And part of my story is that I was in the middle of all of this. I was dealing with pretty severe abuse from my dad, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, you name it. And so Bill knew that my home was very unsafe. So he was promising ATI or IBLP headquarters as a sanctuary. What I know now is he was IBLP is not a sanctuary at all, but instead he was actually grooming me, and he was preying upon me to be one of his many, many, many victims. Eventually, I did go to the IBLP headquarters when I was 18. I was there for 2 weeks, and I was abused by Bill at the time. I was sexually harassed by him and preyed upon. And about a year later, after that experience, I came across a website called recoveringgrace.org. And I came across it, I like to say completely by accident. I think God directed me to that website. And it was started by former students of ATI who were survivors, and they had experienced abuse within the system, or they had since come to realize that what was being taught in the system was not actually scriptural. It did not align with the heart of God. And so they began writing articles on this website about their stories and what they experienced and what they believed was the true gospel. And I came across this website and read some of their stories. And one of the stories included a woman who was also sexually groomed and preyed upon by Bill. And I read that and I just got chills up and down because I realized that I could have written that article. And long story short, eventually some victims came together and filed a lawsuit against IBLP and against Bill in 2015. And I joined that lawsuit. I was one of 19 plaintiffs. We had 17 women and 2 men. And we fought hard in that lawsuit for 5 years until 2020. And we did not end up going to trial. We eventually did have to withdraw the lawsuit voluntarily due to a lot of legal complexities, some statute of limitation issues, and also just trying to measure the cost involved, not financial. I mean, yes, some financial, but mostly the emotional cost, the toll that it would take on the plaintiffs to be able to go to trial, and what we would actually get in return for such a costly measure. And we ultimately decided that the best choice would be to withdraw. But we were validated by the judge in a evidentiary hearing. The judge listened to our testimony because Bill had filed sanctions against us and had claimed that we had lied in our lawsuit, and that our allegations were false and our entire lawsuit was not valid. And so we were all brought to Chicago to testify. And the judge said that he found the women's testimony to be credible and denied Bill's request for sanctions. So that was our win in that lawsuit. It wasn't the win that we were originally seeking, but it was the win that we eventually got. And it was absolutely worth the blood, sweat, and tears to get there. In the process of those 5 years, I became a different person. I went through a deconstruction process with my faith. I left the church for a while. I eventually found my way back there. I started reading scripture with a whole new lens, really discovered who Jesus is. And I started sharing my story online. I started a blog. It's called Thriving Forward. And that's what I do now is I work with Thriving Forward to create, as I said in my bio, I want to create a safe space for survivors to be able to share their story. I want to create a community where survivors can connect with each other. Thriving Forward is a place where I write a lot of informational material to give to survivors who are coming out from all kinds of abuse. And I absolutely love what I do right now. I'm in training right now to become a certified advocate and coach. So I can help some women in the most crisis state of their life. I really want to help women when they are trying to leave domestic violence. And that's my next goal. So that's what I'm doing. And that's what the future looks like for me.
Yeah. You highlighted something in your story there that some people accuse anyone that comes forward from abuse. They're always accused of either being a Jezebel or that they're trying to gain something from this. They're trying to make money or they're trying to be more famous.
Mm.
But that part of the excuse, or what people say, is not right. I mean, because there's no win. Like you said, even just someone acknowledging it was a win.
Yeah.
Because the rest of that for a victim it's all lose. It's lose. And if I speak up, it ruins a career or it ruins something in my life right now. It's going to be tougher on me. People are going to make, right? Or can you clear up what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah, no, I understand. I do think seeking justice is worth it. And I think it's important. I think that a lot of survivors are told, at least in the Christian environment, that justice and mercy are opposites, and that the Christian thing to do is to be merciful and to forgive and to let it go. Actually, scripture says to do justice and love mercy, not do mercy and love justice. Doing justice is a commandment, and mercy isn't the opposite of justice. It's how we do justice. Mercy is enacting justice only to the point that is necessary and no further. In other words, not seeking vengeance. It's mercy is extending kindness when you are in a superior position to your offender. You're in a morally superior position to the person that offended you because you're in the right and they're in the wrong. And you can extend that kindness in the midst of justice by not seeking vengeance, and vengeance is God. But I do believe that justice is important. That saying, it still comes at a cost. And I do think that that's misunderstood. A lot of, I would say, especially sexual abuse survivors are criticized for those who choose not to report or press charges. They are criticized for that. And the question is always, well, why didn't you report? My answer is only someone who's naive about our criminal justice system would ask such a question. Because for a survivor to report and to work through the U.S. justice system, there is such a cost. As I mentioned, there's an emotional cost where you're looking at usually years of exhausting work, where your offenders' defense attorneys are ruthless in looking into every area of your past. I had to turn over years worth of messages, emails, text messages. I had to do a download of my Facebook. So every private message I had ever written to anybody on Facebook was turned over to the defense team, whether it involved like Bill or not. Everything had to be turned over and searched. I had to turn over all my private journals. Anything I'd ever written about Bill had to be turned over. Things that were extremely private were turned over not only for attorneys to read, but for Bill to read. And that was difficult to reckon with and to accept. There's the physical stress of it all. A lot of times that mounting emotional stress can result in some physical symptoms. And then you're dealing with, if you ever do go to court, you're dealing with testifying in front of your abuser, having to retell your story over and over again. Even if you don't make it to trial, you're retelling it over and over again in depositions and interrogatories, and one attorney after another attorney, maybe reporters. And it's a lot of re-victimization, a lot of reliving your most horrific time in your life. And I applaud every survivor who goes through that. And I also completely understand for anyone who chooses not to go through that, because it is rough. And we were in the civil court and didn't go through a massive trial. So I haven't even experienced what it would be like to go through the full criminal court process and go through a full trial like that.
Yeah, as you're talking, I keep thinking like the amount of re-traumatization that you or other survivors have to experience just to get some semblance of that justice that you're talking about.
Yes.
I mean, I can't even imagine, but just in listening to your story, like I can feel that, and how, I can totally see both sides, like what you're saying. Like, you can totally understand people that maybe aren't willing to go through that because just the emotional and mental and physical toll that it takes on you just to relive your abuse and relive that trauma day in and day out. Yeah, that's a really good point, I think, that you make there.
Yeah, it is a lot. And I think survivors are sometimes have a higher expectation of what it may accomplish for them emotionally, as if they're going to have such satisfaction after it all, that they're really going to feel that justice was fully enacted. And oftentimes that doesn't happen. And so there's some understanding that needs to take place of, even if you go through all of this, it may not give you the peace that you're looking for. A lot of times that peace has to come through other inner work that you do, and deep healing work that you do with a professional therapist, work that you do between you and God. A lot of times that healing is not found in a courtroom. There's healing to be found in a courtroom sometimes. My experience in that Chicago courtroom was extremely healing and validating, but that was also in the midst of working through intense therapy with professionals and going through that whole deconstruction journey and refinding a relationship with Christ and all of that. So the courtroom was not the only thing for me that brought healing.
Every time I hear these kind of stories, I think the same thing. I said, how can this happen? How could I, all the time I was raising our children, I thought, how could I ever do anything like that, right? Inside my family. But why does it happen? How does it happen? I guess my question is, how do we get to this place where, we have institutions that are, run by a guy that's targeting people? What are the things that contribute to this that you'd like to see stop or work better or not do at all? Or how can you say something about that?
Well, I think we're seeing a lot of this in fundamental circles and fundamental Christianity, because patriarchal Christianity, fundamental Christianity is set up to give male abusers, which a high percentage of abusers are male. I know there are female abusers. I know, but a high percentage of abusers are male. And the fundamentalist Christianity sets up male abusers to have ultimate power with no accountability. because they're considered at the top and they're considered above reproach, and they are considered the mediator between a woman and God, where a woman cannot have direct access to God, but rather she has to go through her husband. That kind of system encourages abusers. It enables them. It just allows abuse to flourish. I think this is why we see abuse happen so often within the clergy, and abusers often seek positions of power where they are less likely to be questioned, where they are seen as having a flawless reputation. So respected individuals like physicians, attorneys, well-loved school teachers, law enforcement officers, possibly, clergy, all of those positions automatically have a level of power and respect that they're less likely to be questioned when survivors come forward with allegations. We call this the halo effect, where if we see that someone is really good or talented in a particular area, for instance, we think a pastor is extremely talented in their preaching, then we automatically assume that they are above reproach in all other areas of life, and that they must be a really, really good person. And
speak well.
What?
Because they speak well.
Yes. Thing, right? And it could be so many other things. Like I said, it could be a respected teacher at a school. And you just automatically give them the benefit of the doubt that you assume that they could never actually be an abusive person or even a child predator, because what you see on the outside, you just automatically assume that they're an amazing person. So we have to be really, really careful to realize that you have to be aware of that halo effect and that bias that we can have, and make sure that we realize that pretty much anyone could come out as, or anyone could be revealed as an abuser. And it is important to listen to survivors and to not just toss allegations aside and assume, oh, well, not that person. That could never happen. That person would never abuse. We should never, ever have a bias like that. We should do our due diligence to seek the truth and find it. And false allegations by survivors are so minuscule. They're very, very rare. It can happen, but they're extremely rare. And it's important that we do our due diligence. But yes, to go back to your original question, this is very common in fundamentalist Christianity, because just the way the system is set up attracts abusers and automatically gives them this power, and silences children, silences victims who are often there, silences children and silences women who are often victims in the system. Also, there's an entire layer of purity culture, which purity culture goes hand in hand with fundamentalism and patriarchal Christianity. And purity culture also grooms a lot of individuals to be abusers. Purity culture does a terrible job of teaching young individuals proper sex education. Purity culture teaches that men are entitled to a woman's body, that women are seen as walking temptresses. Every part of a woman is going to be tempting to a man. Men are told that God designed them to lust and to have this uncontrollable desire. And I mean, that just feeds abusers into justifying their actions. It makes victims feel like they're at fault. Women feel like they're at fault for abuse because their body is so tempting. It's their fault because they must have not covered up well enough. So that's a whole nother part that makes this kind of abuse so popular in those, or so common in those circles.
So how as, parents, I mean, our kids are grown, right? But let's speak to the parents that might have, young children at home that are invested in church. I mean, how can you help parents prepare their children? How do you teach them to tell, like if something is happening or if they are being groomed, or, how do you advise parents on how to teach their children some of these things that you're telling us tonight, like how to look out for that and how to be able to communicate that?
Well, honestly, the responsibility needs to land on the parent or guardian, because they are the ones with the emotional maturity to be able to spot things, to take action. We shouldn't place the responsibility on a child, because predators often will use tactics to frighten children to stay quiet. The best thing I could say now is to recommend a fantastic resource. It's a book called Predators by author Anna Salter. And it's Predators. The subtitle, I think, is Pedophiles, Rapists, and Psychopaths, and other abusers, something similar to that. Sorry, I'm blanking out a little bit. But Predators by Anna Salter. And that book will really, really arm parents to be able to put their guard up, to recognize how these predators function, how to be able to spot signs and become aware, how to protect your children. That book is just an incredible, incredible resource. I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah. And I hope I didn't come across as sounding like it is the child's responsibility or blaming the victim. Absolutely. If that was not my intent, but I guess to me, it's like if being in the churches that we were in, of course, Karl was a pastor, but there were youth pastors and I mean, like you said, a predator doesn't have to look a certain way or have a certain title or anything like that. And so, if our daughters or our son had come, it's such a mind shift, because it's like, I can just hear people in my life going, well, that would never happen at our church, And so not believing the child, or like, no, that would never happen. And so I guess that's where I was going with my question, because we have to believe people when and especially our children or, our friends, if they are coming to us and saying that this is happening. Yeah.
I mean, there are certainly things that we can tell our children that can help to arm that. Yes, definitely. So I think it's really important to, first of all, teach children proper anatomy and the names for body parts from an early age. Don't use nicknames, use proper names. And a lot of individuals who were raised in the purity movement were not even really told what sex was until they were teenagers or later. Sometimes girls entered marriage and didn't even really know what sex was. And so making sure to have a proper sex education early on, teaching your children proper autonomy and consent, really, really nailing in consent, and that no one can touch their body without permission other than maybe a doctor while, mom and dad are watching, or even mom and dad. And even then parents can teach consent. And there's some things where, sometimes you gotta make sure your kid's clean. And so they don't want to take a bath. Okay. And I'm sorry, but your kid's got to get clean. And so there are times that you just have to follow a safety rule. Mm-hmm. But in other areas, such as tickling, you can practice consent with your child and give them the opportunity. You can make a game out of it to where you start to tickle them and let them know. As soon as they say no, you will stop. Mm-hmm. And then let them have them ask again, do you want me to keep tickling? And so you can do different games like that to teach consent, where you can give your child the opportunity to say no. Another place is for hugs. Always make sure to ask your child if they want to hug, and never force your child to hug someone, even if it's their grandparents or an uncle. Mm-hmm. Letting your child, even when they're little, to be able to make those choices about their body and who touches them in what way. That's really important. And then making sure to never use shaming language around your child. Shaming language was so common in the purity movement with, as I mentioned before, girls were shamed with their bodies and told that if they didn't wear the proper clothes, and then they were going to get looked at by men, or that men would lust after them and it would be their fault because of the clothes they were wearing. So instead, making sure to avoid any kind of language like that, and making sure that they know that your child is never, ever at fault or responsible for an adult in behaving improperly toward them. Mm-hmm. So those are a handful of things that you can do to make sure your child feels safe and has a voice, understands their own bodily autonomy and consent, and above all, just making a safe place for your child to be able to confide in you if something does start to go wrong.
Right. Really good. Really good.
What I was curious about is your healing. You kind of mentioned a little bit, but can you tell us how, after you we call it the desert, you come out in the desert, you're hoping, trying to get better. Tell us about that part. When did you start to get better, and how did you get better? I know it may not be the same for everybody, but can you share that with us? Would you be willing to?
Yeah. So I joined the lawsuit in 2015. I signed the papers in November 2015, late November. And immediately I thought, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm probably going to need some counseling. And so I actually started with a biblical family counselor. I don't recommend that now I recommend starting with a professional therapist for sure, and making sure you find a therapist who is trauma informed. And if you have gone through religious trauma, that they are well-versed and informed in religious trauma, or possibly PTSD or complex PTSD, whatnot. There are certainly good biblical counselors out there, but many of them are not safe. And so I did start working with a biblical counselor. And in this case, this was a safe individual. And I had my first session with them December 15th, 2015. And that day is now what I call my Freedom Day. And it's a day that I celebrate every year, the anniversary of it as it comes around. And it was the start. It was the start of my healing journey. At the beginning, we started working through the abuse that I experienced, not only from Bill, but also from my father. And I knew that I had been sexually used by my father, but I didn't know that what I endured qualified as molestation or lewd conduct or even assault. I didn't know that. I didn't understand the proper legal terms. And so in my mind, the abuse wasn't as bad as it really was. So sometimes for survivors, the very beginning of their healing journey is just coming to a realization of exactly what they have lived through, because oftentimes they just don't realize the scope of what they've endured until they have a professional who's able to validate their experience and give some proper names to it as well. I realized that I had experienced a term that's called emotional incest. I experienced real incest too, sexual incest from my father, but I also experienced emotional incest from my mother. And I wouldn't have understood that unless I had gone through therapy, where since my mom had such a broken relationship with my father, her husband, she turned to me to provide some of that emotional intimacy that she should have had from her husband, but she turned to her child for it. And this was a very, very common thing in houses like the one I grew up in. But so yeah, that beginning is often coming to just terms and a reckoning of exactly the extent of everything you went through. And that process for me took about a year. And then I took a break for a few months. And then I ended up coming back and I said, okay, I'm ready to consider the ATI was a cult. Because even up until then, I had been in the lawsuit for 2 years at that point. It was 2017, and I still was not able to voice or admit that ATI was a cult. And so I started digging into more articles on recovering grace. I started reading books on spiritual abuse, and I read through a series called Untwisting Scriptures by Rebecca Davis, that she's wonderful at bringing out specific scriptures that are usually commonly twisted within churches, scriptures on submission or modesty or marriage and divorce, whatnot. And she will bring in some of the Greek texts and show, like, this is what it actually means. And of course, what those verses actually mean are usually very healing and very freeing, the complete opposite of what we were taught the twisted version to be. So I went through that process for a while. And in 2018, 3 years into lawsuit, is actually when we formally withdrew it. We ended up fighting those sanctions for another 2 years, but 2018 is when we withdrew it. And that is when my body crashed. So I was living off of adrenaline up until that point. And then when my body thought it had permission to crash, it crashed hard. And I developed PTSD symptoms pretty much overnight. My body completely freaked out, where we thought something was seriously physically wrong with me. I ended up in the ER several times for heart palpitations and passing out at work and muscle twitching and constant like tense muscle anxiety and tension. And my resting heart rate for about 6 months was 145. It never went below that. I mean, some pretty serious physical symptoms. And it was just years and years and years of my body letting go of so much emotional trauma and stress. And at that point is when I switched to a professional therapist, and I started something called EMDR therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. And I recommend anyone who's listening to look into EMDR. Do your research on it. It's not for everyone. Sometimes EMDR can even be re-traumatizing to certain victims because it involves going back to certain traumatic points in your life and visualizing them and pretty much like reliving them in the moment. But you're in a safe environment in your therapist's office, and you're doing things with your hands that are causing your brain to be able to reprocess that memory so your body doesn't store it as trauma anymore. It's highly effective for some, but it's not for everyone. For me, it was very effective, and my PTSD symptoms dropped by about 90% after doing that for a year. And ever since then, I've continued to work with therapists or sometimes coaches and mentors. And I'm still in the process of healing. In 2020 is when I got married to my husband, and that opened up several new layers of healing in the healing onion, as I call it. Peeled back a lot of trauma that I didn't know existed as a single individual. And then when I was married, it was like, oh, okay, there's more healing to do. I know one day I would love to be a mother. And I know that if and when I become a mother, that too will probably peel back some more layers of healing that I'll need to do. Every season of life usually does prompt new healing. And that's why I think healing's a lifetime journey, honestly.
I really appreciate your vulnerability and sharing so much of your story so openly. Because I think a story, and when we share in a safe community, it can be so healing to other people. So I'm just so confident that this is going to just really touch some people and maybe help spur on their own healing journey. So just thank you so much for being here today, Emily. If people want to know more about your story or want to have some questions for you, is there a way that they can get in touch with you?
Yeah. So my website is thrivingforwardblog.com. I'm most active on social media, and you can shoot me a private message. It's just Thriving Forward. It's either on Facebook or on Instagram. Most active on Facebook for sure. And I will answer private messages through there. I do have a private support group via Facebook. It's actually a membership support group. It's like $5 a month. It's really cheap, but it provides additional exclusive resources for survivors. We do videos in there, and we have this community of survivors to where you can actually ask some questions and get some feedback from the rest of the community and have some more individualized support. So that's another thing I offer. And I do monthly Zooms as well on different topics. So yeah, come over to my page and search through some of my content, see if any of that would be helpful for you.
Yes, well worth it. And you had said in your bio that your story is on Amazon Prime. So can you tell us how we can find that?
Yeah. So at the time of this recording, it's a documentary that I was part of. It's not out yet. It comes out June 2nd. It's called Shiny Happy People. And it is a project that I've been a part of for the last 2.5 years. I did 10 hours of filming with the team and a lot of survivors. It's an entire documentary, a 4-part miniseries about all about IBLP. They do tie in the Duggar family, which is a family that had a TV show on TLC called 19 Kids and Counting. They were the poster children for ATI. I heard them speak at the conferences every year. I sometimes hung out with some of the kids of the family. So the documentary does talk about them. They're not the main focus. Mm-hmm. Main focus is IBLP in general. And there's so many survivor stories. So I can't wait for that to launch. I think when this podcast finally releases, it'll probably be out there already. So you can hop on Amazon Prime and go listen to that. Yeah.
Yes. Wonderful.
All right. Super. Thanks for sharing about that. Thanks for sharing your story. We take it seriously when we listen to people's stories. And I think, like Laura said, that people will relate and they'll be encouraged by what you said.
Yeah.
For listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week, I guess, next segment, whatever that is. But I want to remind you to be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary.
Remember, all that wander in the desert are not lost. We hope that you know
you are seen,
you are heard,
and you are loved.